final point, I've been part of the working group set down by EFRAG in the EU to come with recommendations for what could be European standards. And I have been very active in the reporting space, leading Novo Nordisk's integrated reporting, and also as a member of the IIRC Council. So integrated reporting and value creation and potential destruction are very close to my heart. So thank you very much for having me here.
Thank you, Suzanne. Really appreciate everything that you're bringing to the board, and followed the work that you had done at Novo Nordisk, and of course, we've been on. I think our first panel together was years ago, but great to now have you in a different capacity here with us today. So wonderful! Thank you for being part of SASB's efforts. And now we'll go to Mark. Mark, hello.
Yeah, thank you, Jeff, and thank you for having me. My name is Mark Vaassen. I'm really delighted to be here in my first SASB meeting. I'm also saying good afternoon because I'm based in Amsterdam, so also Europe-based. I'm a partner at KPMG, where I'm at the moment heading up our national office for the audit practice. But I have a long history in dealing with financial reporting, having been the firm's global IFRS leader for more than 20 years, where I was based in London, and had a lot of interaction, obviously, over the years as the IASB developed since 2001 up to where it is now. So that's the background, and in my current capacity, I'm also still leading internationally for KPMG our network of Better Business Reporting. So these are all the people that are dealing in the field with integrated reporting and also with sustainability reporting. So that I've been doing for the last few years. Maybe also good to mention, similar to Suzanne, I am quite close to European developments. For many years, I'm the Deputy President of Accountancy Europe, which is the trade body for the audit profession in Europe. And in that capacity, I have a lot of interaction also with the European Commission and with ESMA and other European stakeholders. And I'm on the board of EFRAG, the European Financial Reporting Advisory Group that is at the moment talking about taking on the role on corporate reporting for Europe, as Suzanne was mentioning. So I'm really looking forward to the interaction with my fellow board members and with the staff. And what I would hope to bring is my experience in standard setting, the interaction between sustainability reporting and financial reporting, and just generally, I think a lot of experience in the international reporting landscape. So I hope that I can bring an international perspective to the board. We really look forward to it.
Great, thank you, Mark. We're super excited to have you on the board, and I don't know how you and Suzanne do it. You certainly, I guess so many of us are busy, but I appreciate all the enthusiasm you bring, and that you can find some time to contribute to the effort that we're engaged in here. So thank you for being here. Great. So with that, actually, we'll just I'll also call on Lloyd Kurtz, who I believe now is able to join with us. Lloyd, are you there? Great.
How's it going?
It's good. Thanks for being here, Lloyd. So that is our standards board, and then of course throughout the session today we'll be joined by some of the research staff at SASB as well. So great. Why don't we go ahead and look at the topics for today? So we have 4 topics, and as we normally do at our standards board meetings, we're going to start with the general update of things that are happening and of relevance to the organization, and then we'll go into our standard setting agenda and look at, we have many projects that are ongoing, a lot of effort continually taking place kind of behind the scenes. We will be getting an overview of some of that, and then we'll be diving deeper into a few specific projects that we have on the agenda for today. So after we go through an overview of the pipeline, we'll talk in a little more detail around the human capital research project in particular, as there's been some recent developments there that we think it's a good opportunity to give the board and the public an update on. And then that will all be in our first half or so of the agenda for the day. In the second main session, we will dive into a deeper discussion around a couple particular projects. One relates to the work on our governance documents, the conceptual framework, and our rules of procedure. And there, this will really be one of the first opportunities that we've had to hear back on the public comment letters on the work that we've been doing in those projects. And so really just the first step in starting to process the feedback that we received as part of the public comment period, but a really important part of our process, and looking forward to hearing about the comment letters and engaging in some discussion and education around that. And then we will be turning to the infrastructure sector where we'll be talking about some opportunities to potentially improve the standards and looking at some of the work that goes on in the development of a pipeline of potential work to find opportunities to improve the standards and address comments or feedback that we've gotten on them. So we're looking forward to that discussion as well. And then we will wrap at about 11:30 Pacific time. So with that, why don't we go ahead and jump into the first topic for the day, which will be to do our standard setting agenda overview. And David Parham is here to lead that for us. He's the Director of Research Projects. So David, welcome.
Great. Hi, Jeff. Thanks. Excited to join everyone today. As you just mentioned, Jeff, I'll focus on providing us with a relatively quick overview of our portfolio of projects, try to touch on some key updates on projects that aren't on today's agenda to keep the board and the public apprised on our progress on multiple fronts. And then, as mentioned, Jeff, I'll provide a few key updates on some developments in the field that are relevant for our work. Really look forward to any questions or discussion with the board related to our ongoing standards development work. Lots of activity going on across the team, and of course, happy to dive into any of these areas in additional depth if it would be helpful to the board. So let's go ahead and jump in. And let's take a look at the current set of projects that we're actively advancing. So first, just wanted to orient us on this slide and sort of the infographic that you see here. This is sort of a visual depiction of our standard setting process as described in our rules of procedure. So if we start on the left-hand side, you can see a number of our projects that are sort of clustered in this early phase research, issues monitoring side of our work. And of course, those research projects really help us to understand, identify, and assess potential standard setting opportunities. As we move to the middle of the slide, you can observe projects that are moving through our standard setting process, including our preliminary deliberations, evidence gathering, consultations, and so on, moving towards proposing standards updates and ultimately initiating public comment periods. Afterwards, we of course take the result of those public comment period into deliberation and move towards issuing a standards update where appropriate. So as you can see, we have a range of projects across this spectrum, and I'll briefly take a few moments to touch on the early side of this pipeline, really focusing in on our research projects in my next comments here on this slide. Now, in terms of what we have circled here in red, those are the items that Jeff just shared that are on the agenda for today. So of course, in that issues monitoring bucket, we have the session that we'll have with Will, who has done a tremendous amount of work within the infrastructure sector, doing that early phase research and identifying potential standard setting opportunities related to the sector. So Will's prepared quite a bit of materials to help dive into with the board and identify what some of those priority areas will be to help carry forward and initiate work in that area. Also here, as Jeff mentioned, we'll be getting an update from Kelly on our ongoing efforts around our human capital research project. So definitely won't steal her content and let her provide the deep dive on some of what we heard in our recently concluded open consultation period, as well as what we're planning for next steps throughout the year. I just want to remind the board and the public, this project really remains a top priority for our team and for the organization. It's going to be a key focus for us this year, so lots more to come on this project throughout the year. And then third, on the right-hand side, we have the discussion that Jeff mentioned on our key governance documents, our conceptual framework, and our rules of procedure. Really looking forward to the discussion where we can dive into some of what we heard during the recently concluded public comment period and implications for our forward work in those areas. But let's turn our attention to the other research projects that are shown here on the left-hand side of the screen, and I'll just touch on each briefly, given these items aren't on the agenda for today, but some key updates related to them that I thought I'd share with the board. So if we look to our internationalization efforts, this is a project that's focusing on identifying and addressing instances in the standards where there may be metrics, topics, technical protocols that are not internationally applicable, and seeking to address those instances to ensure that the standards are globally applicable and able to be used in an international context. So this is going to be a big priority for us this year as well. The board may recall last year we invested significant time and effort to holistically analyze really every topic, metric, and technical protocol across all of our different industry standards to identify instances where we have references or constructions of the standard that may impede their ability to be used effectively in an international context. And once we had identified those areas, we did a significant amount of analysis, market engagement, really to better understand these instances and help us define approaches for how we will be able to resolve those issues. So this year, really where we're looking to advance this work is by focusing on identifying specific projects that we can initiate coming out of that foundational research work, which we completed last year. So just to let the board know that you can anticipate us bringing forward recommendations this year from the staff based on that foundational research work to help us meaningfully advance our internationalization efforts this year. So big focus for us. Moving down the list on the left-hand side there, the next project you see is our content moderation project. Board members may recall last year, based on that research project and that extensive research work, the staff proposed a standard setting project focused on content governance in the internet, media, and services industry. We're thankful to receive the board's approval to move forward with that project. Related to the research project here, we did publish a comprehensive taxonomy document that presents the results of that extensive research work. You can find that on our website associated with the project page. And I'll focus a bit more on the standard setting efforts in the next slide, but just so we'll hold my comments on that for now, but just to reemphasize, this continues to be a very important and rapidly evolving issue, and the staff remains focused on advancing our standard setting efforts in this area. For our alternative meat and dairy project, Devin, our project manager, was able to provide the board with an update in our December board meeting, focusing on reviewing the evidence and market input we've gathered so far related to that project, and discussing some of the potential implications for standard setting priorities. The board provided some very valuable feedback in that session to help identify next steps for the staff, including some targeted additional research and consultation. Devin has been pursuing that work, and based on that additional work, working then to develop a recommendation for the board on whether to proceed to standard setting, and if so, what the scope of that project will include. We're currently anticipating being able to bring that recommendation forward in our next standards board meeting. And the last project that I'll touch on here briefly is our project focused on supply chains in the tobacco industry. Staff has conducted a series of consultative activities with companies and investors, and additional evidence gathering and analysis. And again, similarly, is working to prepare a recommendation for next steps on this project, again, targeting to bring that forward to the board in our next meeting. So that's a quick overview of a lot of work going on across these different research projects. Just pause here quickly, see if there's any questions on any of that work. Otherwise, we'll move on to some updates on our standard setting activities. Great. So lots of activity on the standard setting front as well. And similarly, just going to walk us through our pipeline here, which you can see depicted on this slide. You can see each of the projects listed, key dates or milestones across the top, and then the red dots indicate our current approximation for when we would be seeking a board decision related to these projects. Similarly, thought it would be helpful to walk through and provide quick updates on each of these projects, particularly those that aren't on the agenda for today. If we start at the top with our raw material sourcing and apparel project, this project is focused on how companies in the industry access certain priority raw materials and how environmental or social issues can affect that access to those key priority materials. And it's really looking at a couple of metrics associated with the topic and seeking to identify, understand, and execute improvements to those measurement methodologies. So in the last board meeting, Taylor provided us with an update on her consultative findings and her some of her research and analysis based on those engagements, and proposed some next steps, really recommending to maintain the current scope of the project and pursue revisions consistent with that scope. And based on the board's feedback and discussion at that meeting, Taylor is currently working toward preparing materials for a public comment period, including some potential revisions in an exposure draft and basis for conclusions to accompany for review by the board. And she's working diligently towards having those materials prepared and targeting a public comment period in the first half of the year, targeting hopefully before our next board meeting to have those materials for the board for review. A very similar timeline for our systemic risk project, which of course is focusing on evaluating the systemic risk topic and associated metrics in our asset management industry standard. In the last board meeting, Anton provided the board with an update and presented some of his preliminary conclusions based on the extensive research and stakeholder consultations he's conducted around this issue. So the board was able to review and provide input on the staff's recommendation. Anton then focused on carrying forward what he heard from the board in the last meeting. And quite similarly to the raw material sourcing project, which I just mentioned, Anton's currently focused on preparing materials for a public comment period, including an exposure draft and basis for conclusions, and to submit that to the board for review, working again towards initiating a public comment period in the first half of the year. Based on our current plans, we anticipate bringing these materials to the board relatively soon, likely before the materials associated with the raw material sourcing project. So really trying to organize and sequence this out, and of course anticipating hopefully a couple engagements with the public around these projects in the not too distant future, which is really exciting to see this work advance. I'll move next to our tailings management project. So the board voted towards the end of last year in December to initiate a public comment period for this project. That public comment period is still open. We published an invitation to comment associated with that public comment period that includes an exposure draft, basis for conclusions, and questions for respondents. All those materials can be found on the project page on our website, and comments can be submitted through our website. You can find out how to do that right on that project page. So just to remind the board and the public, that public comment period is scheduled to conclude in just under a month on March 17th of this year. And after that closes, we'll of course be reviewing all the comments that we received, and of course presenting those for consideration by the board to deliberate on next steps, including whether to proceed toward preparing an updated standard for review by the board. All this, of course, will depend on what we hear in the public comment period, and we do very much encourage any interested parties in this project to review those materials and welcome input and comments on those materials that I just mentioned. Jeff, I see you jumped on. Anything you'd like to add here?
Yeah, actually, it was a question. I know that the website, SASB's website, has gone through a big refresh recently, and just a question on how quickly public comments get posted, and just so that the public might also be aware of when they submit a public comment letter, it will be public. Wondering how quickly that is going to happen.
Yeah, it's a very good question, Jeff. So as you mentioned in our rules of procedure, we all public comments, letters that we receive, we will post on our website. We're still in the process of collecting public comments for this particular project. And I think once we receive those, we're talking to folks on our team in terms of the process that we'll go through to get those posted on the website. But you can expect us to do so relatively quickly after the close of that public comment period so that the public's able to see what we received, what we heard, what we considered, as we move towards potentially issuing a standards update. So I don't have the exact timing for you just yet, but I'm happy to share that with the board and with the public once we've established exactly when we expect to get those up on the website.
Yeah. Thanks, David.
Thank you, Jeff. So that's a big milestone for us this year, focusing on that project, and look forward and again encourage stakeholders to provide your input as part of that project. It would be fantastic to get the viewpoints of companies, investors, and subject matter experts as part of that public comment period. Moving to the next project here, our Plastics, Risks, and Opportunities project. I always struggle with that one. The staff is currently actively pursuing consultative activities around that project, working towards developing an exposure draft and potential revised topic and metrics for the chemicals and pulp and paper standard. As a reminder, that project's looking at the impacts of plastics across these industries and how companies are adjusting their business models based on evolving regulation and issues pertaining to single-use plastics and other issues around this, around plastics use. The results of the consultation ultimately are going to drive the exact timing for the preparation of those materials, but we're anticipating that we'll be in a position to present exposure draft and basis for conclusions, public comment related materials to the board for review by mid-year. And then I mentioned the content moderation project on the previous slide. Our standard setting efforts related to this issue are captured in our content governance in the Internet Media and Services project. For this project, staff is currently pursuing consultative activities with companies, investors, and subject matter experts. These are really exploring how SASB can address this issue in the internet media and services industry, including how we might craft topics and metrics to capture and help companies disclose in a comparable decision useful way on this issue. So we expect those consultative activities to continue into the second quarter of the year. And of course, we want to take that into account when we're establishing our forward timing, but based on the results of those consultative activities, we anticipate we may be in a position to provide an update to the board in the next board meeting, and then perhaps target an exposure draft for the following meeting. But of course, much to come based on the results of those consultative activities. Hey, Kurt.
Hey, David. You mentioned a number of projects here and the status of them, and made a brief mention anyway of our website redesign. And you guys spent a lot of time on that to make it more user-friendly and information-rich. Could you spend a couple minutes talking about how that redesign will help our various constituents?
Thanks, Kurt. Yeah, great question. So one of our major organizational initiatives last year was efforts to make our website a lot more effective for folks who are visiting, trying to find information, and particularly for our standard setting efforts, helping the public understand what we're working on and what we're seeking to engage the market to learn more about, and then particularly making it as frictionless as possible for folks to then engage and provide your input. So there's a number of different changes that have taken place related to our website to try to achieve those objectives. One of the key things is we've really overhauled our active projects page, which you can find under the standards section of our website, and tried to make that much easier for a stakeholder to understand what SASB is working on, what phase particular projects are in, when we're seeking market feedback, what that feedback, what specific questions we have for the public, and then providing a very simple, easy to follow way for you to engage with us to provide that input through very clear links to how you can get engaged. So those changes have been, for me, very welcome, and glad to see that we've hopefully made this a bit easier for folks to get engaged and understand and provide input on these projects. Of course, we welcome ongoing feedback on ways we can continue to improve. A couple other quick things I'll mention that may be of value to folks who perhaps you've heard a project here that you're particularly interested in. One function that we've added is for any particular project, you can subscribe to project alerts. Just one click on the project page to do so. And you'll then be subscribed, and whenever there's a major development or update related to one of these projects, you'll get a notification in an email about that update so that you can really stay engaged on the projects that are most important to you. And so we have several hundred folks who have signed up for those, and so far I think they've been a helpful tool for folks who who really want to stay up to date on how some of this work is advancing, and particularly understand when there's opportunities to engage and provide feedback. Of course, we'll take feedback at any time, but there's certain periods, like public comment periods, that the public typically appreciates understanding when those have been initiated. So part of our efforts to make sure that that's as transparent and easily accessible for the market as possible.
So if I'm in a specific industry as a corporate, I could just have flagged anything that shows up in food and beverage or whatever.
Something we've added is to the project pages, you can quickly see which projects affect which industries and subscribe to updates to those projects. So if you're in a particular industry, you can quickly get to which are the projects that really could impact me that I want to pay attention to.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thanks, Kurt. The last couple of projects here to touch on are, of course, our projects related to our governance documents, rules of procedure, and conceptual framework. I won't spend a tremendous amount of time providing an update here, given this is on the agenda, and we'll be spending quite a bit of time discussing these. But just to remind the public that we did have a public comment period for proposed updates to those documents. That public comment period concluded at the end of last year. And of course, discussing the results of what we heard from the market is on the agenda for today, which will be a very informative discussion. So moving from our project work, I just wanted to provide the board with just a few updates on some of the important things that are happening in this space and sort of happening around the space of sustainability reporting and sustainability disclosure in general. So as the board may recall, in November of last year, some very exciting news. SASB and IIRC announced our intent to merge and to come together under the Value Reporting Foundation, targeting completion of the merger mid this year. And just say that we're really excited about this development and everything that all the opportunity that it creates. Really, this was directly in response to demands from the global market for convergence among reporting standard setters. And really importantly, the integrated reporting framework and the SASB standards are complementary tools for investor-focused communications, with integrated reporting really providing a foundational leading framework for integrating sustainability information with financial and other capitals. And then SASB providing that industry-specific disclosure standards to help effectively disclose that sustainability information. And so this was a really important step forward that's consistent with the vision that was laid out in a joint statement of intent titled the Comprehensive System for Corporate Reporting. That was really described in a joint paper between CDP, CDSB, GRI, IRC, and SASB, lots of acronyms there. But this group of 5 framework and standard setters published in September, really describing this building blocks approach to creating that comprehensive system for corporate reporting, and how the different frameworks and standard setters provide those building blocks to help create that comprehensive system. And this merger represents a significant step forward, consistent with the vision that was laid out in that paper. So there's a lot more to come on this throughout the year, but I wanted to provide just a quick reminder and update to the board and public around this significant development in the field. Again, we're all very excited for this work to continue. Jeff, yeah.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
Yeah, just quickly on the Value Reporting Foundation and the intention to merge there. I think, as you mentioned, it's a really big step forward. I think that the 99% of what I've seen in terms of the public's response to this seems to be very positive, very encouraging, and and to be sure, I think this will bring several work streams along with it that will really take time and effort to get the value that we see to actually realize that value. But I think it really is a great opportunity to help to consolidate the field, and even I think in my view, just talking about how we're trying to service the same market, and essentially like we are trying to provide decision useful information to the capital markets, and that is our goal. When we say that as part of separate organizations, we may use the same words, and people may question the extent to which we actually mean the same things. But it's easier to help bring clarity to that when we're all part of one organization. And so I think it's great, and I do of course want to emphasize that the work that we do, that we've been dedicated to for the last almost 10 years now at SASB, is going to continue to be our focus of broad sustainability issues focused on the industry-specific information that we hear that the market needs. So, but anyways, it's great to see, and I know you're heavily involved in probably all of those work streams, or most of those work streams that are going to be coming along. So appreciate your effort in this as well.
Thank you, Jeff, and genuinely excited about all the opportunities that I'm seeing that will come from this, and totally agree. We still have plenty of work cut out for us here with the standards board and the staff around our standard setting efforts. So it's certainly no changes there in our focus, but a lot of benefit to come. Next big topic to talk about is, of course, the ongoing efforts at the IFRS Foundation around their focus on what they might do in the area of sustainability reporting. So we did share a little bit on this in the last meeting, but just to kind of get us back up to speed on what we discussed in December, and then some new developments related to this. As a reminder, the IFRS initiated a consultation last year to explore the potential role that they could take in the area of sustainability reporting. That consultation concluded at the end of last year, and that was really focused on the IFRS trustees seeking to understand what the foundation could do around sustainability reporting. That grew out of a task force of the trustees that was established in January of last year, and that task force had worked really closely with investors, regulators, central banks, auditors, and others to really explore and understand sustainability reporting and the potential role that the IFRS could play. And so, as they shared in the consultative materials that I'm sure many folks who are tuned in here were read through in great detail, they found, of course, as part of those task force efforts, really growing interest in sustainability reporting. But a key aspect of that consultative document noted the urgent need to improve the consistency and comparability of sustainability reporting, which certainly is a language that SASB speaks. The consultation featured 11 questions posed by the trustees, and those were really designed to help evaluate the IFRS's role and remit if they were to move into this space. And that was part of the IFRS's 5-year review of its strategy, which started in January of 2019. So really important development in the field. And that consultation ended at the end of last year. And the IFRS recently shared sort of the first look at some of the results that were received during that consultation period, and particularly in response to a review of answers to the first 3 questions from that consultation paper. So coming out of a meeting that took place in early February, they shared some initial signals of what we can expect to come. They shared that they received 576 comment letters, quite a bit of interest, which is to be expected, and that those responses indicated a growing and urgent demand to improve the global consistency and comparability in sustainability reporting, really reinforcing that what the IFRS had found in that task force exercise. And they also observed a demand for the IFRS Foundation to play a role, and that was consistent, again, with what the task force had discovered in their preliminary investigation into the issue that I shared on the previous slide. Coming out of that February meeting, the trustees agreed to form a steering committee that will oversee the next phases of the work. And importantly, they defined a key requirement for success being the urgent need for global standards, and most notably within the pantheon of ESG, perhaps a focus on climate being particularly important. So the next meeting of the trustees will take place in early March, and IFRS noted their intent to produce a definitive proposal by the end of September of this year, possibly leading to an announcement at COP26 in November, again later this year. This, of course, remains highly important development in the field. Brian shared highlights from our response to the consultation last month. Again, if folks are interested in reviewing that, it is available on our website. if you'd like to see our full response. Of course, SASB is supportive in principle of what the IFRS is pursuing in this area, given the importance of this information for capital markets. But needless to say, incredibly important development in the field, one which we will be monitoring closely and continuing to remain engaged with. Related to this, late last year, I want to share a publication that was launched late last year that we participated in. This was a publication, again, issued by that group of 5 that I mentioned a couple slides ago. That's CDSB, the Climate Disclosure Standards Board, the Global Reporting Initiative, Integrated Reporting, and SASB. I didn't use the acronyms this time. Shortly after our board meeting in December, we issued this paper, which is titled Reporting on Enterprise Value, illustrated with a prototype climate-related financial disclosure standard. This was really a follow-up to that September joint statement of intent that I mentioned. And what this consisted of was a prototype climate standard that was really designed to tangibly demonstrate some of those concepts from that joint statement of intent, and particularly how the standards and frameworks of the group of 5 can be brought together to provide a comprehensive and robust solution for climate-related financial disclosure. So this really brings those elements together powerfully to create a comprehensive solution around climate-related financial disclosure. So there's 3 broad focuses in that paper. I won't spend a ton of time. There's a lot in it, and I would highly recommend folks who are interested to read through it, because I think it's a very interesting presentation of some of those concepts from that group of 5 paper, and particularly focused around climate. But just some broad things that paper focused on. Number 1, to sort of set the stage, it recaps some of the key concepts from that joint statement of intent that was issued in September, and particularly focusing on those elements that are subsequently illustrated in the prototype. Then it provides observations around the applicability of the IASB's conceptual framework for financial reporting to sustainability-related financial disclosures. And that's a really important foundational discussion around the conceptual framework that would govern and define sustainability-related financial disclosures, which is then applied in the context of climate-related disclosure. And then 3rd, it demonstrates how the group of 5 framework and standards, along with the TCFD recommendations, could form the basis for the development of a climate-related financial disclosure standard. So that's really the details of how these different elements come together to really support effective disclosure focused on capital markets. So really the intent here is we hope this is a prototype that is a helpful example of the concepts from that joint statement of intent that could serve as a running start for future standards development, for example, that could be taken up by the IFRS. So for those that are interested, highly recommend reading this paper. It's conceptually dense, but in ways that I think are quite informative and important. Jeff, yeah.
Yeah. Thanks, David. Great overview of this paper, and a couple things just to more comments than anything else. But one comment again. This is not a due process document from the various bodies, but in fact, sort of prototype is the right word to be using. It's sort of like a thought exercise of how we might see the complementary nature of the various organizations working together to be a basis for some type of a robust approach to climate-related financial disclosure. So, but one thing I really like about this effort is, and really maybe like the building blocks approach that we talk a lot about. I think 2 things about the building blocks that I think is really important for people to take away. One is that the building blocks, the blocks are not in competition with each other, right? They're serving different purposes, and it's because each of these organizations started with a particular mission that they were trying to fulfill, and it arose out of a market need, and so that's why there are different blocks, and they build to something bigger than the individual pieces, which I think is really important, and so. I think it emphasizes the complementary nature of how we do what we do, and the importance of a robust solution to reporting needs, having a building blocks approach. Because if we leave out a significant block, then there is the potential for a gap in the marketplace, in terms of what is being asked for. And so anyway, it's great. I appreciate the fact that SASB has taken this approach of supporting the building blocks. And I would note that IOSCO has taken a similar view, it seems, from some of their recent press releases. So very exciting to see. But I see Mark has jumped on as well. So Mark, I'll pass it over to you.
Yeah, Jeff. Also, probably more a comment than a question, but saying that having read this document, I think it is a very good contribution to the discussion which will be helpful to clarify, to many of the people at the moment considering how this all comes together. How the various standard setters could work together, and there are a number of elaborations, I think, on, for example, the concept of dynamic materiality that we will come to talk to probably later today. That I think are really worth looking at and see what we can pick up from that discussion. Also when we're talking about conceptual framework, that was one comment. And yeah, Chef, I was also going to mention I did note the IOSCO announcement that came out yesterday that specifically also referenced the need for industry-specific metrics on sustainability as part of the full setup, which I think is important from our perspective, that is being recognized. And I just going to say that IOSCO was a crucial factor also at the time when IFRS came about, and so they do reference to the fact that they were a driving force behind it. I think the announcement of yesterday, therefore, for me at least, was quite significant. Thanks.
Hey, Mark, this is Kurt. I had not had a chance to read the IOSCO yet, but I guess one of the elements with the IFRS is whether they will adopt industry specific, right? Which should be a big difference for SASB anyway.
Yes, and if you look at the moment, clearly, in the financial reporting structure, there is not an industry specific. It's all based on the concept of contracts rather than on specific industries. Although some are more, contracts are so industry specific that they are only applicable, for example, to the insurance industry. But I think it's a big discussion still to be had, how you fit, the principle-based system of the financial reporting together with the more industry specific standards that we have. And I think that's a discussion to be had. But it's positive that IOSCO recognize that the two go together.
Yeah.
Yeah, on that point, Mark, about the prototype and some of the work that is in there in sort of advancing this idea of how it all fits together. I completely agree with your point that this is going to come back to some of our discussion probably today on the conceptual framework, but certainly on that project, because when we started our conceptual framework rewrite, revision, we weren't being pushed to really connect to financial reporting. And after we put out the revision, we saw the interest from the IFRS Foundation and others. And so this group of 5 work, I think, has been a great way for us to start to engage more around how we can be more helpful in connecting some of the pieces for the marketplace. And so I'm sure this can be beneficial to the work that we're doing.
Right. Thanks.
Yeah, fantastic. I'll just say, based on the comments, I just want to recognize our partners in this. This was a really interesting exercise to think through exactly the issues that were raised by Jeff, Mark, and Kurt here, and really thinking about how these things can come together and what conceptual framework or concepts would be applied in the process of doing so. And so just huge thanks to our partner organizations in working with us to develop this. CDP, CDSB, GRI, and IRC, as well as the Impact Management Project and the coordinating role that they played. So major thanks, and yes, a very interesting document, and encourage those who are interested in some of the discussion that we just had to dive in and learn more on that prototype and discussion paper. So a couple more slides for me here, and then I'll wrap up and we can jump into exciting updates on our human capital project from Kelly. But I just want to mention continued amazing support from the investment community for SASB, most recently demonstrated in Larry Fink's annual letter to CEOs, of course, the CEO of BlackRock. The letter emphasized really the global threat posed by climate change and emphasized the fact that climate risk is investment risk. A number of very important points made in that letter. Particularly important to SASB is the emphasis on investor needs for consistent, high-quality information on ESG factors that impact the value of companies. And in the letter, Mr. Fink reiterates BlackRock's endorsement of TCFD and SASB aligned reporting to help get that information into public markets. So just incredibly humbling to see that support, and certainly helps us recognize the value of what we do and how we can help capital markets through our work. This is the latest in a series of high-profile investor associations who have expressed support for SASB over the past year. The board may, of course, recall last year's letter from Cyrus Taraporevala, similarly called on companies to use the SASB standards. Last year, a group of the largest pension fund managers in Canada asked portfolio companies to use the SASB standards and the TCFD recommendations. Our investor advisory group issued an updated statement calling on companies to use the SASB standards and disclosures to investors. And the Board of Governors of the Investment Company Institute also issued a statement encouraging U.S. Public companies to provide disclosure aligned with SASB and TCFD. So just all really important signals, signs of continued momentum that is connected to one of our core tenets and our conceptual framework, ensuring that our standards provide decision-useful information to capital markets. Let me pause there. Mark, I saw you jumped on. Did you want to add a comment?
Sure. Thanks, David. I mean, I think I think you hit the nail on the head. This is exactly right. The support that we've gotten from investors has been phenomenal. The ICI Institute, which is the bottom of that of this slide, is a very, very big organization. Usually very circumspect before they weigh in on a topic like this, and so for them to acknowledge that there's emerging consensus around SASB and TCFD, what I thought was really interesting. We continue to hear from companies, or I continue to hear from companies in my day job about, trying to understand the difference between stewardship investors and active investors, and so, I think if you could talk a little bit about that breakdown and how we continue to see, certainly the stewardship investors very, very strongly influencing, but also we're continuing to see the active investors participate significantly in our IAG, et cetera.
Yeah, it's a great point, Mark. And I think that's one thing that is incredibly helpful about our investor advisory group and our standards advisory group is there's really a lot of intentionality in constructing the composition of that group to recognize the diversity that exists within the investment world. We often refer to investors as though that represents some sort of monolith, but of course, as you just described, Mark, there are many different use cases for this information, for sustainability information, depending on a particular investor's strategy, their position within the investment landscape, and so on. And we're very mindful of that, and that's very intentionally built into our process when we talk about the utility of information, the decision usefulness, and some of the characteristics of metrics and topics. Again, we keep going back to the conceptual framework, but really it puts the onus on the staff in those engagement and consultative activities to understand what the different use cases are of different market participants, depending on where they sit in the investment landscape, and test that thinking around how is this information useful in driving investment decision making, depending on all of these different use cases. So I won't say that's an easy or straightforward thing to do, but it is inherently baked into our process to have those considerations inform what we on the staff, of course, recommend to the board. And as you just touched on, Mark, it's something that the board is focused on as well in applying the conceptual framework to the recommendations that we bring forward. So I think just to tie it back to this slide, it's really fantastic to see the diverse range of investors, asset owners, asset managers, active, passive, stewardship, et cetera, who are engaged and find value in the work that we do. But in providing that value going forward, we need to ensure that those voices are loudly heard in our process, and we're fortunate to have the conceptual framework that enables us to ensure that consistently will be the case. So very important, maybe nuanced issue for some, but highly important to our ability to serve our constituents in terms of capital market participants. Any other questions or comments here? Otherwise, I can wrap up with one last slide, which is an important one. So I want to take a quick opportunity to share with the board some exciting news and with the public that our team is growing. And we're really excited about this. We're in the process of hiring for 3 positions right now, 3 very important positions within the team. We are hiring for analysts to lead our financial sector as well as our technology and communication sectors. 2 very, very important, all of our sectors are important, but these are definitely important as well. And we're also, we'll be posting very soon a position for a climate lead to lead our research efforts around climate change and the implications for our standards, given, as we just heard from Mr. Fink's letter, the financial materiality broadly of climate risk. So these are going to be really impactful positions for our team. As you've probably picked up on from my prior comments, we are pursuing a lot of exciting and impactful work across the team and across the organization. And so really would encourage folks who are interested to learn more about these positions to visit the careers section on our website and join a very active, enthusiastic team pursuing work related to ensuring capital markets have the information they need on these incredibly important issues. So I just wanted to highlight that for folks. We're really excited about this and can't wait to welcome a few new members to our amazing team. So I'll go ahead and wrap up my comments there. I want to make sure we have plenty of time for Kelly to dive in and give us an update on our human capital research project, but just want to thank the board for giving me the opportunity to provide a few of these updates on our projects and some of the key developments. And we'll just pause here and see if we have any additional questions before handing it over to Kelly.
Thanks, David. That was great. Maybe just one thing quickly on the climate expert that we're looking to hire.
Yes.
Maybe you can give a little bit of context, because I think a climate expert that would that would fit SASB's need wouldn't necessarily be the climate expert that would fit every organization's need, and we have a particular approach to the way that we do things. So if people are out there listening, thinking like, is this the role for me? Any thoughts on it in particular? Yeah. What would help with that?
Yeah, it's a great question, Jeff. Thank you. So we're really looking ideally for someone with a technical background, a real understanding of core climate science and the application of that science to economic or financially material impacts to capital markets. And so once the position's posted, definitely encourage you to look at the details of that position, but really see the importance of that deep technical understanding of the issue, and then the ability to translate the significant volume of active research, regulatory developments, and so on through to specific standard setting priorities, where that process of filtering is through the application of our conceptual framework and understanding the implications of all the emerging and continuing growing body of evidence, the implications of that for financially material impacts to companies based on industry, and therefore where our standard setting priorities should be focused. And so this person really is going to own that process of identification, monitoring, analysis, and then strategic development of where our priorities need to be based on the synthesis and understanding of all of that information. So it's a really exciting position, and I look forward to posting that job description, and hope we get a lot of excited candidates to lead that function within SASB, which is a very, very important position for us.
Great. Thanks, David. That's very helpful. Any other thoughts before we turn the time over to Kelly? I see no attempts to jump in, so why don't we go ahead and pass it over to Kelly. Welcome, Kelly. It's always great to see you.
Nice to see you, Jeff, and thank you so much for the opportunity to give you an update on our human capital research project. So just to jump in here, for today's agenda, we're going to be covering two areas, an update on the most recent phase of the project, the public consultation, and then I'd like to just discuss some next steps for board engagement. So specifically, we'll revisit the objectives of the public consultation, discuss some high-level themes that we're observing from the quantitative results of this survey data, and then we'll discuss some major milestones which require the board's engagement. So just as a quick reminder about this project, we've seen this slide several times before, but I do want to just remind the board that the objective of this research project is really to develop this evidence-based and market-informed framework on human capital, which will help us to define human capital across our standards and ultimately set our agenda for future standard setting. Additionally, as a reminder to the board, these are just the 5 themes that encapsulate 9 sub-themes that were in our preliminary framework and that we asked participants in the public consultation to comment on. So again, just recalling the public consultation objective, our intention here was really to solicit the public's view on the industry agnostic themes that we outlined in the revised preliminary framework, and to develop this evidence-based and market-informed view on how these themes manifest at an industry-specific level. And this was a really critical stage of our research project, since the feedback we received from stakeholders will guide the human capital project pipeline and will help us to more comprehensively address the issue of human capital within our standards. So more specifically, we issued 3 stakeholder-specific surveys for companies, investors, and subject matter experts. So we designed these surveys to really extract information specific to each stakeholder to understand how the industry-agnostic themes are outlined in the framework manifest at this industry-specific level, in addition to asking about the financial materiality of these issues. So specifically for companies, we wanted to understand their corporate views and strategies around the financial materiality of these themes and sub-themes in the framework, and also how they manage and track these particular issues as a company. For investors, we really wanted to understand their views kind of at this higher level, portfolio level, on the financial materiality of these themes and sub-themes across our 77 industry standards, and understand and identify which industry trends kind of support their materiality view. And lastly, for subject matter experts, we asked questions around their views around the themes and sub-themes, and particularly regarding if these themes or sub-themes should be added or removed to SASB's consideration, and if they should be measured in a more decision useful and or cost-effective way. So just as some examples, I've outlined some of the questioning that we provided in each survey. So as you can see with companies, we asked them to discuss the context of their corporate strategy. Where investors, we asked them to answer the materiality across a portfolio of companies, so kind of taking this more industry-specific view. And for both groups, we asked them to contextualize their answers in terms of linking the sub-themes to channels of financial impact. So we mean assets, liabilities, revenues, expenses, cost of capital, etc. And for companies, we really wanted to have them rate the materiality of these issues from highly material to completely immaterial, whereas investors, we asked them to rate them at the materiality across multiple industries. So does this apply to all or nearly all industries, or largely not material to all industries? For subject matter experts, on the other hand, we asked more about the content related to the evidence in the framework and their views on how to measure and incorporate these themes. Multiple choice questions were asked to the subject matter experts as well to respond to these sub-themes, and if they should be added or removed, and if they could be designed to be more decision useful or cost effective. But all the participants were asked to provide a longer free-form response in our additional comments and feedback section, where we offered engagement questions to kind of guide their feedback and asked respondents to elaborate on their multiple choice questions in the survey, or address issues that were not adequately addressed in our framework. So getting into some of the results, while we're still receiving stakeholder input from the consultation, these are some numbers that were pulled most recently. So we received roughly 25 corporate responses, 22 investor responses, which were largely asset managers from all different types of roles, various sizes from very large asset managers to smaller asset managers focused on social impact investing or other types of ESG type investing. And then lastly, we received 57 subject matter expert responses, and that included a wide swath of respondents, including academics, consultants, civil society organizations, other standard setters, and raters and rankers. Oh, and I do want to note, just going back to the previous slide, that these were pretty much in line with our expectations. The subject matter expert category was expected to be the largest, just given that it was a catch-all for kind of anyone that wasn't a company or an investor. I do want to remind the board that this is still kind of early days on the count, since extensions were granted to some respondents. And this also doesn't include some of the supplemental consultations that analysts are doing to focus more on the industry-specific impacts and understanding the materiality of at this industry-specific level. Additionally, I just wanted to note that with the new regulation SK rule coming in around human capital disclosure, we are monitoring those reports as well, and it is a really good basis for data for us as companies are beginning to report and disclose on human capital. So based on the aggregated and quantitative data from the survey, we believe that the research project objective...
Hey, Kelly, can I ask you a question before you go on? I mean, you've kind of anticipated what I wanted to ask, but I was wondering if you're satisfied with the industry breadth of the responses you're getting. I know you have other inputs than just the surveys, but it kind of struck me that 25 companies obviously doesn't cover all of 77 industries, and you are looking to draw conclusions here that will, I think there's like supposed to be a heat map of issues in different industries, so you'll need fairly broad input. I was going to comment too that there might be some use in the SEC filings on this issue, but you've covered that.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. I'm happy to answer that. I think for the company results, they were a little bit slim, but I know that our analysts are also reaching out to companies that did not respond to the survey, following up, scheduling consultations. So the numbers that we presented in this slide are probably a little more robust, even underestimated, just because it doesn't count all the work that our analysts are doing on that front with their individual consultations. For the investors, I think that, we could always use more input. That's always appreciated. I was very impressed just with the different size and breadth of the investor input, just kind of in terms of size of the asset manager based off of AUM, what they focus on. So it was a really great mix. And I think what we're largely seeing from the responses is that there's a very similar line of thinking, just generally speaking, among investors. So I felt like this was probably a very good sample size of, what we're hearing and understanding from investors. But
how random is it? I mean, is there an industry focus to the people that chose to respond, or pretty much across the board?
Yeah, I felt like it was very much across the board. And a lot of these asset managers are covering several industries, so have a lot of great insights on, all the different industries. But what I think is most noteworthy is that a lot of companies and investors pulled in different analysts or departments to kind of answer the questions. So we're getting responses like from a very broad company view, which is really great, as opposed to one specific analyst or department, so we can understand what that looks like at a very high level.
Thanks.
Great. All right, so I just wanted to say, just based on the aggregated and quantitative data from the surveys, we believe that the research objectives of this project have largely been met, just based off of the general consensus among most companies, investors, and subject matter experts around the relevance of these themes, and in some cases around the financial materiality of the themes and sub-themes in the framework. Just some other early insights that we wanted to note. There's 4 of them. The first one just being that there's evidence and stakeholder views that suggest that some of these issues that we outlined in the framework are more widespread across our 77 industries and are currently not applied consistently across our 77 industry standards. The second observation that we've made from the results is that there's really, like I've said, consensus around stakeholders around the relevance of these themes. But again, the case for financial materiality of these themes and sub-themes truly varies by the industry, just depending on the industry's general industry characteristics. The third observation that we've made is that there's really also a disparity in stakeholder views between investors and companies, particularly around the materialities of some of these issues. So it's been really interesting to see that in some of the results and trying to square those up. And then the last point I'd make is that really around COVID, just given its broad global impact and also the ensuing protests for racial justice, it's really raised the relevance of certain themes and to some extent accelerated some of the macro environmental value drivers that we mentioned in our framework. And so as a result, it could have longer term implications for both companies and investors. So for companies, that could relate to how they manage their workforces. And for investors, this could be mean a change in what issues become more relevant and potentially financially material. And I saw you jumped on.
Hey, Kelly, yeah, this page raises a couple of interesting topics, I guess. The first, looking at number 4 there, that clearly with COVID-19, remote work and all that, companies are rethinking some of their human capital management, and so we should be hitting at a good time. One thing you might think about is, and I know we tend to ask for feedback in independent focus area, but you might consider doing some group calls, kind of focus sessions with either multiple corporates at the same time to get that kind of dialogue going, or multiple investors that have different views. Because I think we all learn from each other on these things. So it might be a way to stir the pot a little bit. My question is this disparity in views between investors and companies. Any structural issues that investors think that more is important or less, or anything initial coming back from that?
Yeah, I mean, I think what comes to mind, and I know this is just a very hot topic, is the diversity and inclusion topic. I find it really interesting that investors, just very generally speaking, high level, say like highly material across all or nearly all industries, very important. Companies that they kind of vary. I would have expected them to kind of mimic that response by saying highly material, but they kind of rate it as more moderately material. And it's really interesting to understand, through how they contextualize their responses, like how that kind of squares up. So, we definitely need to do some more digging, more analysis, but just high level, I found that very interesting, and given the importance of it, it'll be important to look into.
Yeah, and this is, if I may also raise a point here. So I noted that from the corporates, it's mainly sustainability professionals who have responded, whereas, there would be different functions that would own the human capital issue. So I guess that's another challenge to look into is who owns the issue or the problem, if there is perceived to be one. And then just reflection on the materiality, because what strikes me in this particular research is that here we are certainly also looking at the impact to the people, so that the human capital is looking at the value creation or potential erosion on the part of the company, the employer. But how do we then factor in the dimension about impact to the people? Thank you.
Great, thanks, Suzanne. Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I mean, I think this topic is just so broad, and I think there's a lot of different ways people are thinking about human capital. I think from a SASB perspective, I think we're trying to understand, how companies are, like, put very simply, I guess, just kind of managing and treating their people to create long-term value creation. So it kind of ties to, how productive they are, how they're feeling, the environment of the workplace. So, I think that's kind of been our focus in this particular project. But I think we recognize that there's a lot of other impacts, other things that are happening related to human capital, and have much broader implications. So we'll have to look at that a little bit more. But I think we're trying to be very narrow at first as we think about these issues.
I think I'm next here, and Kelly, I'm really curious to see this early insights on point 2 here, level of materiality varying by industry, and especially focusing, I believe you said the survey questions to corporates and investors were asking for feedback on the materiality of the 5 key themes and the 11 sub-themes. And I'm wondering, across both corporates and investors, was there anything that stood out as having strong feedback that it's not material to both groups or either group that we should really be focusing on, either getting additional feedback on or doing specific research in one of those themes?
Yeah, thanks, Verity, for the question. I think I'll just preface that we have much more work to do on the analysis side. So my comments are very high level, but based off of what I've seen, I think the diversity inclusion question was very interesting to me, just given the different levels of materiality versus investors and companies. The other one that I found interesting was maybe alternative workforce. That, I think maybe a while back it had been very material. With these new results, it seems a little more lukewarm this time around. So I think we're thinking about kind of this whole issue and how to kind of incorporate it into our standards, if at all. I mean, most likely we could incorporate it to some extent. It is somewhat incorporated in our standards now, but I think that we could do more work. But we definitely will need to look at the results to understand, how that kind of plays out. And that theme is definitely industry specific and where the material risk is.
Thanks, that's helpful.
Hey, Kelly, so just a couple comments here, and I know your next slide was probably going to ask about questions that we had, so I'll anticipate that slide, or we can go to it if you want, but I might direct you back somewhere else anyway. So I think one of the questions you were going to ask is like what questions do we have about the research process to date, and I want to put these results into context a little bit, so I have a couple questions about that. But I think it's important that we understand the extent to which we should draw inferences from this consultative effort, and then also think about how that fits into the broader project plan, because this is just one piece, and so we can talk a little bit about that as well. But on this specific project, I'm wondering if you've thought a little bit about this is the research side of me and thinking about survey construction. And so, in survey research, we generally think about, broadly speaking, 2 types of bias. And it's like response bias and non-response bias. And that's not actually a mirror image of each other, actually. So non-response bias is when people that don't respond to our survey may have different views than those who did. And a response bias, unfortunately, with a very similarly named or similar phrase there, is really around like the way in which we ask questions affecting the way people answer the questions. So just a couple questions about that. On the non-response bias, do you have a sense for why people responded to this particular survey? Is this people that, for example, had signed up to follow the Human Capital Project and so knew about it, and or were there specific targeted efforts that we had to draw in certain types of participants? And just wondering, like, how we should sort of think about the extent to which these people might be particularly enthusiastic or particularly strong opinions one way or the other around human capital. So I'll let you comment on that first.
Sure. Thanks, Jeff. I think with the survey and kind of getting our universe of respondents, I think we did a great job in terms of trying to reach as many people as possible. SASB has several networks from its investor advisory group, Alliance, Standards Advisory Group. So we canvassed all of those participants, also those that signed up for the project alerts on our project page. So that may capture people that are not part of any three of those groups, but have a particular interest or subject matter expertise. I think we did reach out through social media as well, through like LinkedIn and Twitter and things like that. And tried to partner with some key stakeholders, like to kind of share the message. And then, of course, word of mouth is very powerful. So sharing that with people that we've interacted with to say, please, here's the link, please share this with your networks. So I think we've been able to get a good universe of canvassing there, but I'm sure there's more we could do.
Yeah, and maybe Jeff, I can jump in a little bit too and just add, I think it is important, the point that you made, that this is one of many, many data points that are ultimately going to inform the conclusions that we reach, and very mindful of some of the things that you mentioned around response bias and even survey construction. So we're just thinking of these as a mosaic of information that is ultimately going to enable us to make the best decisions when applying our conceptual framework. So completely on the same page.
Yeah, and that was really going to be my second point, is putting this a little bit into the context of it. We go all the way back to last summer, and we had the early hypothesis testing, which actually captured some of what I think Kurt was suggesting we could do potentially more of, but having some of these dialogues. So I know that there's a lot to all this, and tracking all of the input that we engage in on a project it's one of the challenges of doing the work that we do. And I think Kelly, you've got one of the bigger challenges here, because this is such a big effort, and it's been going on for a while, because it does have many different drivers, many different themes, could potentially affect any industry, and happens to be something that's both evolving and of particular timeliness, and so punctuated by some very poignant sort of things going on around us that captures everyone's attention. So I appreciate the comments there. Stephanie, did you want to ask something or comment?
Yeah, Kelly, if you could go back to the previous slide. I thought the point 1 and point 2 were interesting in that it seems like there are more widespread issues, and that may vary in materiality across industries. So I'm curious, it sounds like diversity and inclusion may be one of them. Are there other issues that you've noted that are widespread, but there are differing views on materiality? And this may be too early in the process, but that would be something I'm curious about, at least later on after you've done some analysis.
Yeah, thanks, Stephanie. Yeah, I think in terms of, just high-level observations, like the DEI question is really big. I think that is an example of where we could definitely do more work, where it is more widespread than we had initially put in our standards. So there's definitely work to be done there. With the workforce investment question, I think there's probably more that we can do there, but we do really need to understand what type of training is kind of like a key driver in the industry, and understanding how that kind of links up with corporate objectives and what they're trying to do. So that is a great example of where I think the issue can depend on the industry and the level of materiality. With the mental health and worker well-being question, that's also another one that's probably a great example of kind of varying by theme as well, or by industry as well, just given what workers are doing on a day-to-day basis, who's their main workforce, and what are the major risks. So like manufacturing will look different from tech or what we commonly think of as tech. So it will be really interesting to get more into the results. But I think high level, those are just some examples of things that we're seeing and how it can vary or be more consistent across our industries.
That's really interesting. Thank you.
Hi, Kelly. So you said you were doing this, and I think that that's great. The 10Ks, at least in the U.S., that just came out, that are starting for the first time to include human capital. Companies had to create their own, disclosures from the start, asserting materiality of these topics. And so I think it'll be great and really interesting as you guys review those to categorize them into the five themes that you're evaluating now, and to sort of see, I could almost envision you'd have a whole rich database of information where you'd be able to say, well, look, companies are actually in these sectors saying that this theme is more important, and that could be some good evidence for you, I would assume, going forward, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you hit a great point, Mark, that, I feel like the reports, that the disclosures that companies provide, especially with the new human capital disclosure rule, it will be a really great way to test our themes, understand what companies really find material. So I think to David's point, that will be another data point for us going forward as we make these considerations. I know it's still kind of early days for companies in reporting this stuff. So we will see what the data kind of shows us from this, but definitely something that will be an important consideration for us going forward.
Okay, thanks.
Great. Well, I know that we've answered a few questions. There'll definitely be more time if there's more questions, but I did just want to end on this particular note just about kind of next steps for board engagement going forward. So I wanted to, again, just show the major milestones remaining in this project that are basically timed with the upcoming standards board meeting. So for May, staff plans to share with the board the full analysis of the consultation results and discuss any potential broad implications for the standards. July, we will plan to release all our key deliverables, which include the finalized framework, where the staff will define its views on these broad themes on human capital, our industry heat map, which is really a tool designed to indicate staff's current thinking on how these themes manifest at an industry-specific level. The last and most importantly is our initial set of proposed human capital projects. So this will really signal from when the project is transitioning from research to more standard setting. So that will be a critical turning point. But of course, the proposed projects are proposals, so be definitely contingent on the board's approval so we can move forward with this project. However, I did want to, I felt like it was important to note for the board that that the staff will plan to continue to hold working sessions in either small group discussions or individual engagements with board members in order to solicit your input on these major milestones of the project. And especially around the implications of the standards, which includes primarily the development of the project pipeline and the finalized framework. And these sessions will be helpful in moving us forward on these deliverables in a meaningful way and to help us to continue to guide staff thinking on the project pipeline development process.
Thanks, Kelly. Yeah, actually, I was going to ask just for a little bit of clarity for make sure everyone's on the same page with respect to these deliverables. One way I think about the three is that it's really the last bullet point that is going to be a standard setting activity, and so what we might think of as like a product of the standard setting activities of SASB. But whereas the first two, I think, are going to be very helpful for sharing some of our thoughts and the results of the engagement, but not affecting the standards per se. And actually, so to that point, I know you just mentioned a little bit on this, but could you just comment a little more specifically on where you see like the data coming from for the industry heat map. My understanding is, and just to make this really clear, because it's not just the results of this particular survey that are going to just result in a heat map. But I'll let you sort of comment on that.
Sure, that's a great question, Jeff. I think I like to think of it in a couple different ways. I think the preliminary framework, in all our research to date, kind of provides our rationale for and evidence for on the industry agnostic themes. So really very conceptual to some degree. But the analysts are really taking this framework, applying it, and figuring out how these industry agnostic themes manifest at industry-specific level, so making that conversion. The consultations are layered in to kind of help us understand what we can't see in the research, what really happens on the ground with companies and investors and how they're thinking about these issues. So that's another data point. Of course, we look at CSR reports, other regulatory filings, financial reports to understand where companies may fall on the materiality question. For maybe companies we haven't heard from or haven't had a consultation with. So those are all kind of data points that we're using, and I hope with all of this information that will be a basis for analysts going forward on how they want to propose projects related to these industry agnostic themes. So my hope is that in July we'll have our first tranche of projects related to particular themes. So that could be like diversity inclusion is the first theme we may want to tackle.